Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Yip, Detective Inspector of Police in the Joint Financial Intelligence Unit. Thank you, the company's registry, for inviting me to give off you a presentation about the methods of money laundering and terrorist financing and suspicious transaction reporting. This is a notice about the copyright of this PowerPoint file are owned and reserved by the Hong Kong Police Force. Here is the agenda of my presentation today. Firstly, I will give you some idea and introduction about the work of JFIU. Then I will talk about the key legislations relating to anti-money laundering and counter-financing the terrorists. The obligation of reporting suspicious transaction will also be mentioned in this part. In the third part, the methods of money laundering and terrorist financing will be presented in a general picture. And then it will be the main part of this presentation, the STR, including some statistics, the ways of reporting, and some red flag indicators to submit the STR. Finally, it will be the case study. One illustration is prepared in the PowerPoint. Apart from that, I have found some examples of submitting STR by TCSP members. Okay, let's start our presentation. Firstly, about the JFIU. The JFIU is set up in 1989 together with another unit, the Financial Investigation Division, under the umbrella of the Narcotic Bureau of the Hong Kong Police Force. You may wonder why the Financial Investigation Division and we, the Joint Financial Intelligence Unit, are under the Narcotic Bureau. I leave the question here and it will be answered in later slides. The JFIU is co-started by officers of the Hong Kong Police Force and the Hong Kong Customs and Excise Department. Apart from being the sole agency to manage the suspicious transaction reporting regime in Hong Kong, it also engages in financial intelligence exchange with FIUs, which means Financial Intelligence Units, and LEAs, law enforcement agencies worldwide. The JFIU joined the Edmond Group of Financial Intelligence Unit as a member in 1996. Since then, the JFIU has been making good use of Edmond Group's secure network to exchange intelligence with FIU, as well as taking part in the Edmond Group's meetings and training sections to enhance its overall financial intelligence capability. Now, the Hong Kong Police Force is considering to combine the JFIU with the existing Financial Investigation Division and Risk Assessment Unit to operate under a new formed specialized standalone bureau named the Financial Intelligence and Investigation Bureau within the Hong Kong Police Force. Expect in 2021, the quarter one could be complete. Distinctive in its intelligence analysis capabilities and perspectives, the JFIU contribute to the AML or CFT regime through close interagency collaboration with policy bureaus and regulatory authorities, as well as professional bodies, FIUs, LEAs, and the financial institutions and DNFBPs. In the right part, we will see some charters of the JFIU. I'm not going to go through in detail, but I have highlighted some charters involving the operation analysis of STR and doing some strategic analysis of financial intelligence, and other information. Also, we will give some training and outreach about the coordination of AML CFT, just like the presentation now I'm delivering here. For the key legislations, this is the timeline of the key legislations relating to the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. In 1989, the first piece of AML legislation, the Drug Trafficking Recovery of Proceeds Ordinance, DTROP Cap 405, was implemented in Hong Kong. That's why the JFIU and the Financial Investigation Unit is formed under the Narcotics Bureau. Here is the answer, because the first legislation is mainly targeting on the proceeds from the drug trafficking. In 1994, here's come the second piece of AML legislation, the Organized and Serious Crimes Ordinance, OSCO, Cap 455. It extended the money laundering offense to cover the proceeds of indictable offense in Hong Kong and similar conduct worldwide. It further empowered the role of the JFIU to manage the STR regime. And in 2002, the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance, UNAMOD, Cap 575, was promulgated. And it further empowered the JFIU to receive STR relating to terrorist property. And in 2012, the enactment of the AML CFT Financial Institutions Ordinance codified Hong Kong's preventive measures, such as requirements on customer due diligence (CDD) and record keeping, which indirectly increase the AML CFT awarenesses, and thus leads to an upsurge in the number of STR. In 2018, the amendment of the AMNO extend the CDD and record-keeping requirements therein to designated non-financial business or professions, including TCSP. Here are some detailed wordings of the key legislation. It is about the anti-money laundering. Any person knowing or having reasonable grounds to believe any property in whole or in part directly or indirectly represents proceeds of drug trafficking or indictable offense deals with the property, the person will be guilty of this offense. For example, for MSO, if some customer asks the MSO to transfer a large sum of money to foreign country, but without giving a reasonable reason about the transfer, but the MSO still helping the customer to deal with the property and transfer the money to the foreign country, then the MSO might be guilty of this offense. And this part is about the counter-financing the terrorists. Any person shall not provide or collect directly or indirectly any property with the intention that the property be used or knowing the property will be used in whole or in part to commit one or more terrorist acts. So here comes the legislation about the STR, the obligation for reporting the suspicious transaction. Any person knows or suspects any property represents or was used is intended to be used in connection with the process of drug trafficking or terrorist property should disclose that knowledge or suspicion to an authorized officer, that is JFIU. This legislation is implemented to protect the financial institutions or the NFBPs from being complained of during the process of drug trafficking or terrorist property, because they have already disclosed the knowledge to the JFIU. But one thing to be reminded, that is, if you have already disclosed or knows or suspects the suspicion is disclosed to JFIU, then you could not disclose the information to other person. The legislation words are like this: where a person knows or suspects that a disclosure has been made, the person shall not disclose to another person any matter which is likely to prejudice any investigation which might be conducted following that first mentioned disclosure. An example: for a company having employee A and another employee B, if B knows that A has submitted STR against a company F, and B informed company F that A has submitted an STR against your company, so you have to be aware like this, then the employee B is guilty of this offense. So the above are the key legislation relating to the topic today. Here is a very general picture of the ways of money laundering and terrorist financing. First, talk about the money laundering. It could be divided into 3 stages. The first one is the placement. The second one is the layering. And the third is the integration. For the first stage, the placement, it means placing the dirty money into the financial system, such as using the way of smuggling cash through the business, buying variables, currency exchange, securities, real estate, meaning to place the proceeds from the offense, just like drug trafficking or other indictable offense like fraud, etc., placing the money into the financial system. Then through the stage 2, layering, converting the process of crime into other forms, it is a way to create a complex layers of financial transactions to default the audit trail, source, and owner of funds. By doing the layering, it increased the difficulty for investigation units to trace the owner of the dirty money. And for stage 3, integration, it means to integrate the laundered funds from different sources and become a clean asset. It is the final way that the money came back to the syndicate for their future use. Talking about the terrorist financing, according to FedF, nowadays the terrorist financing is still using these 4 ways. First is the abuse of donations and NPOs. Second one is the funding from criminals or legitimate activities. Third is the physical transportation of cash. And the final one is the use of banks accounts and MSOs. For Hong Kong, the overall level of terrorism threat nowadays is moderate. Okay, here comes the fourth part of my presentation and also the main part of the presentation today, the STR. To combat the money laundering and terrorist financing, it requires the cooperation of three parties. First, the left one, reporting entities, and the middle one, financial intelligence unit, and the right part is the law enforcement agencies. It is a public-private partnership between the three parties. First, for reporting entities, examples are financial institutions and DNFBPs. The responsibilities of the reporting entities are doing their CDD plus knowing your customer, KYC, and by record keeping and internal controls, the reporting entities may discover some suspicious transaction or suspicion in their customer. Then the reporting entities will file the STR to the JFIU, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit in Hong Kong. I've already talked about the charters of JFIU in the previous slides, so I will step into the law enforcement agencies. Example like the police in Hong Kong, the Customs and Exile Department of Hong Kong, and ICAC. Upon receiving the STR referral from JFIU, they will investigate financially into the target and trace the assets. When there are evidence or suspicions established, they may apply for restraint or confiscation order. So, the flow of information is like this. The reporting entities have some information and then file the STR. JFIU, as a financial intelligence unit in Hong Kong, will do the analyze and making the information into intelligence. The intelligence will be passed to the law enforcement agencies and doing the financial investigation, and they will collect the evidence by themselves for the next step, which is the charging of the culprit. Some statistics of STR are here. You can see this is the statistic of STR received in the past 10 years. In 2010, there are around 20,000 STR received per year. And like I said before, from 2012, the number of STR has an upsurge to the highest level of around 90,000 STR in 2017. And then we can see a drop of STR numbers because of the quality and quantity balance. Here are some sectoral breakdown of STRs received by JFIU in 2020, the first 10 months. Most of the STR are delivered by the banks. In the left part, you can see it has around 40,000 STRs in this year. For TCSP, you see in the right part, we have received 84 STR in this year for the first 10 months. How to report an STR? You can report by the most simple way, most easiest way, and most convenient, the e-reporting system, the streams, suspicious transaction reporting and management systems. But first you have to apply for an account by sending the application to the JFIU. Apart from using the streams, you can also buy some traditional methods like email, fax, or mail. You can download the standardized form of STR. It has a recommended structure in a PDF format from our website, the JFIU website. We only have the English version for STR form. Here are some red flag indicators for TCSP. If you see some indicators applying to your business, then you may think about doing a more detailed CDD and to assess whether it have any suspicious transaction that has to be reported to the JFIU. Some indicators just like multi-jurisdictional or complex structure of the corporate entities, or the trusts are established without valid ground. Payments are made or received without a clear connection to the actual activities of the corporate entity. The use of offshore bank accounts without legitimate economic necessities. The customer's unwillingness or refuse to provide information or documentary proof on himself, herself, or beneficial owner of the trust or companies. The source or destinations of funds are unknown. Transactions are heavily cash-based, which should normally be carried out through other payment facilities. Or the customer's background is not commensurate with the value of transactions carried out by the customer or on behalf of the company. Or a company is established primarily for the purpose of collecting funds from various sources, which are then transferred to local or foreign bank accounts that have no apparent ties with the company. Incorporation of a company by a non-resident with no links or activities in the jurisdiction where the company is established, or the money flow generated by a company is not in line with its underlying business activities. This is a suggested approach before submitting a STR. It can be named as SAFE approach, S-A-F-E. The first is screen. To screening the subjects, entities, the background, or transactions of it, whether the subject is a PEP or any backgrounds you could find from the open source that leading to the suspicion. When finding some suspicion, you can do the ask. To ask your customer or the subject some appropriate questions to clarify the circumstances. If he or she could provide valid answers or reasons that you believe they are indeed to be true, then her suspicion may not be a valid suspicion. But if he or she could not provide a valid answers, then it increases the level of suspicion. And the third is the find. Find the relevant records for review, including your company's records, or you may need to seek the help from others, companies, or a bank for their records in order to assure whether there is suspicion. And the final is evaluate. After collecting all information from the above 3 steps, you can evaluate whether a suspicion is substantiated. And then if it is substantiated, a STR should be filed. And the next couple of pages are talking about the details of the STR, but I'm not going to go through every column, every word in the form. I will give you a brief introduction about the STR form. First is the summary of the STR. If you are filing the STR through the streams, some part will be automatically generated, such as the number. And the second part is the reporting body. That means when you are filing a STR, the details of your company or your posting, the contact ways of you, so that we may get more information from your company by contacting the person written here. And the next couple of slides is talk about the target subject. The first, if he or she is a person, then you can use the pages of subject here. If the target is an organization, then use the organization part in here for filling the details of the organization. If the subject or organization have more than one phones or address entities, then you can fill them by here. And the next is the account, the bank account or other account that are relating to the company or subject, the target. It could be written here. And here are the transactions. If the transactions are deemed to be suspicious, for example, a suddenly large sum of money transfer which are not in line with the transaction pattern before, then it can be filled in here. This part is the suspected crimes. You may click a box of suspecting the suspicious transaction is relating to what crimes. And here are the suspicious indicator. You can click the box whether for telling us why you feel the transaction is suspicious. You can see the bottom part here is a narrative comment. I will talk more about this part in later slides. And here is the open source information part, and this is a auto-generated pages. When you have filling the form in this last step by the streams, it will be auto-generated for the entity list. And we have some recommended structure of STR narrative for you to fill in when filing the STR. Because by using a narrative and with this recommended structure, as the officers in JFIU, we can simply get the information and know about the overall picture of the STR. First is the triggering factors. You may discover some crimes that are suspected to be committed by the target. For example, fraud, corporate sanctions, terrorist acts, etc. So it might be one of the triggering factors for you to do the CDD and find out the suspicions. Or it may be due to some warrants or court orders received, so you start the CDD. And or you might be received information from open source like the TV or newspapers, and finding that the target, the subject, is involved in some crimes. or the patterns of suspicious transactions. It might be discovered during your review on the customers, like quarterly or biannually, and seeing their transactions record and find some suspicious in there. And the second part is the background of the subjects. If it is a person, then you can write down the age, the occupation, income, transaction history. If the subject is a corporation, then you can write down the dates of establishment, the business nature or expected transaction amount, etc. And the third part is the transactions, that is the way or the pattern that you find to be suspicious or not in line with the pattern previously. So you will write down some details of the transactions. And the fourth part is the inquiries. If you have done inquiries with the target or the customer, and what they said or what you have found could be written down in here. And the final part is the conclusion that you will submit an enhanced, you will do an enhanced CDD and thus filing the STR. Upon sending out the STR, you will receive an acknowledgement of receipt by our unit. And in some circumstances, it may involve the consent or no consent letter measures, which are mainly relating to the banks. And we will upload a quarterly STR analysis report in our website, which you can go to see and to know the trend of the STR recently. And we will also meet with the stakeholders to improve our quality of STR reporting. And final part is a case study. Actually, it's an illustration of using TCSP to commit money laundering. For a criminal, he may arrange a trustee or a TCSP company, and then the criminal, in parallel, he recruits some foreigners, mainlanders, or locals, and find the trustees to help the stooge, to incorporate some companies, and using the companies to do the money laundering. And I've also found some examples of STR submission by TCSP. The first one is a TCSP reporting that the beneficial owner of a target company had employed some unrelated persons and arranging the persons to act as the shareholder and director of the company. The TCSP also noticed some suspicious funds transfer between the bank accounts and thus submitting the STR. And another example is from a TCSP before developing customer relationship with a subject person, because when the employee of the TCSP is processing the request for incorporation of a company, which the subject person only placed an order by email without personal visit and showing original documents. The employee found that the passport copy proof or the address proof and some test letters are suspected to be forged documents, because he or she double-checked in the internet and found that the documents is different from the pictures shown on the website of the foreign country. So observing these forged documents, suspected crimes, the company submit the STR. So here is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any more details, you can go to the website of our JFIU or email to us. Thank you very much.